Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Part of Batman's arsenal isn't just his martial arts or his gadgets, but his ability to instill fear in the criminal element. But what does he do when a criminal doesn't really believe in Batman and therefore has no reason to fear him? I'm taking issue with Batman, The Hill, which will involve fewer themed costumes or crazy people named after animals or storybook characters, and more typical crime. So let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads.
The cover features a standoff between police and casually dressed people who are mostly out of sight, while in the background Batman lunges forward, behind a rather well-dressed bald man, who isn't Lex Luthor for a change. And there's another guy in front of him, sitting with his legs spread out, holding two guns, and it looks almost childlike, as if he's showing off how many bullets he's shot already. Written by Christopher Priest, with art by Sean Martinborough, John Lowe, and Ben DiMagmalou, we begin with a subtitle banner. Death makes a U-turn.
Death is old-fashioned and prefers using a paper map instead of the GPS that came with the Honda rental.
We see two men in a car, and one of them, though it's not well shown, has left to enter a building, and kinda looking like he's being buzzed in. But given what we soon learn, he's probably using some kind of tool to break in. Anyway, he takes an elevator, swipes a card to unlock a heavy-duty door, only to be pulled inside by Batman and sprayed with an aerosol that sends him to Sleepyland, in a room with several lockboxes.
Who knew Lysol made a knockout gas spray?
Heretic.
Oh, my shrink was right. God does hate me.
He calls an already grouchy Jim Gordon, telling him to get to the 35th floor of the Gotham Jewel Exchange, and that the perp's brother is waiting for him outside. After the commish tells him that he didn't need to be so cryptic, Bats just stays quiet, clicks a pen, and that's it. I'm not sure, does that pen double as a phone? The silence is kind of funny, though, and the angle makes it look like he's chilling at the desk chair. But anyway, he takes off, apparently flying?
What's the deal with that? Did he get Superman's powers for a while, or did he perfect human bullet technology?
This looks like a job for the human bullet. Fire me, boy!
The aforementioned criminal sibling waiting in the car is approached by a guy holding his gun sideways, demanding he get out. Instead, the driver opens fire, shooting either bullets or sound effects right through the guy, who's called Hollywood.
Sheesh. I guess if DC can't have consistently good movies, no one can.
Someone else, who we later learn is Hollywood's brother, starts firing with two guns while the driver calls for his own brother, Gunther, when Batman lands on the car and he drives off, narrowly hitting two pedestrians. All the while, believing Hollywood is dead, his brother is still shooting, even hitting Bats as he's thrown out the vehicle. He's likely well protected, but probably none too happy. And in all the gunfire, that's when a news chopper spots the Dark Knight. It's that creature! The Batman! The reporter wants the pilot to forget about the car while she takes the lens cap off the camera to get the scoop of the century, but by the time she's done that, he's already gone and the spotlight is now on the car anyway. First off, there's a space alien in Metropolis that confirmed life on other planets and just wants to help using his superpowers. But a dude dressed like a flying mouse is the scoop of the century? Secondly, this was from around the time when Batman's status as a mythical figure in Gotham was kind of wearing down. It's been so long since that's been a thing, it's kind of surprising to read now. In current comics, everyone on Earth, let alone Gotham, knows and acknowledges his existence. And that's not even counting the people who know his secret identity.
So bringing him up wouldn't bat any eyes.
Also, it looks like the driver went back to try and run Batman over, so it looks like she'll have to scoop up her scoop. Dialogue suggests that the pilot and the reporter checked every square inch, which kind of feels like hyperbole, but moving on. The younger gunman managed to climb into the car and struggles with the driver as they head right toward a collection of squad cars, crashing and flipping toward a nearby restaurant that wasn't cleared out. Why? Or were these two just very stubborn and desperate for a night out? Meanwhile, Hollywood is alive but badly wounded, calling for his compatriot Shorty when he finds an injured Batman. He aims his gun, but hesitates taking the shot, long enough for Batman to knock him down and leave. without checking to see how serious the man's wounds are.
I know the guy is a criminal, but even so, Bruce is usually compelled to make someone in that state get medical attention. And by the sound effects of the weapon Gunther's brother used, it may have been some variety of automatic weapon, meaning multiple wounds.
We jump to the next day. The ultimate driving machine.
Wait a minute, is this comic really about selling BMWs? Kind of early to tip your hand, isn't it?
Bruce Wayne is getting a haircut on a golf course, which is a wonderfully Bruce Wayne thing to do, somberly referencing the incident that left 2 dead, which he's reading about in the paper. One of the guys he's playing against is noticeably irritated. "Hate for this nasty old golf to interrupt your grooming." "Nonsense, Kingford. I'm never too busy to take your money," which is a wonderfully Bruce Wayne thing to say. Kingford is a bit incredulous and indignant at tax dollars going to subsidize those people.
Yeah, brace yourself. There's going to be kind of a racial component to this story, and I doubt it's going to be limited to some rich, uninformed dude.
Seriously, he complains about the ghetto getting free food and rent, implies they're lazy, and that maybe the kid that died will be a lesson.
I don't know, would tarring and feathering a rich guy that clearly doesn't understand the nuance and systemic issues with poverty be a lesson to all wealthy people? Or just those who golf? Let's find out.
Wayne excuses himself from the game, claiming auditors are at one of his company's doors, but heads off to disguise himself. He's still hurting from the gunshots, since Kevlar only does so much, and wonders if those young men were there by accident. Directed by Alfred to a work car that he can drive while incognito, we change scenes to an apartment in the Leslie N. Hill housing projects, with the headline, "This is Me."
This is a weird way to cross over with The Greatest Showman, but hey, at least we might get Hugh Jackman doing a musical number with Batman. That might well be worth it.
A bunch of these title banners pop up throughout the story, so I'm going to save any jokes I have for the end of the video. Anyway, Hollywood, or Trevor as his mom calls him, is contacting someone who calls the hill a hot zone, and he'll have to visit a Bobby Z. He tells Wood to bury his brother Shorty, and that they'll discuss the car thing later.
You see, when a sedan and a hatchback love each other very much and are married, I might remind you.
Trevor and his mom are off to a graveyard, where they encounter Demetrius R. Corley, and she don't like him one bit. His attempts at empathy fall flat as she blames him for her 14-year-old son's death, something she also blames on Jim Gordon, also in attendance, though several yards away. She doesn't seem to care that the boy had a weapon, and thinks any police bullets should have been fired on Demetrius, whom she accuses of bribing her sons with expensive clothes and cell phones so they'll sell drugs for him.
Isn't that just like parents to embarrass you by airing your crimes to the police commissioner at a funeral?
Despite being in operation for years, the cops have never done anything about Corley, and Candace insinuates how telling it is that this must be the commission's first visit to the hill. Trevor leads his mom away, and Batman's now comfortable enough to approach his old friend in disguise as a gravedigger, there to find out any connection between the Dutch jewel thieves and the teen interlopers. He tells his old friend not to beat himself up, since Shorty was armed with murderous intent, but Jim thinks the grieving mother had a point. They spend a lot of time chasing after the likes of the Penguin, and the Dark Knight's methods could do something about the Hill's problems. But that's when our disguised detective cuts the conversation short, as Corley approaches Jim. He says that despite police investigations to try and prove otherwise, he's just an importer of African curios. People on the Hill don't vote, City Hall would like to forget the projects exist, and if the reporter from earlier, Alanis Prescott, hadn't put so much focus on Gordon, he probably wouldn't be here today. However, Corley is much more interested in the guy with the shovel. Looks like a gravedigger. Smells like one.
Thank goodness Batman remembered to wear Corpse Dirt by Calvin Klein before arriving.
As a test of his instinct's accuracy, Demetrius signals a goon who throws a knife at the commissioner, because that wouldn't get anyone arrested, right? Fortunately, Batman stops it with his shovel, leading Corley to assume this is some elite bodyguard meant to intimidate him, like the Batman scare, as he calls it. Jim, don't you know by now? I don't scare. I don't believe. And when he looks around, the gravedigger is gone.
He doesn't believe Batman exists. He says he doesn't get scared. That makes me so happy for later in this story because we all know what's going to happen.
Seriously though, that was a clear attempt on a cop's life, and if he thought it was another cop, that means another witness, and at least his lackey would rightfully be in cuffs. This dude walks the line between brazen and stupid. Sometime later, according to a newspaper, Gordon has sent some officers to the hill to act as an occupying force, apparently in response to Candace's accusations. Alanis Prescott calls him for a comment, while on camera in front of several protesters against the police presence that is allegedly helping another gang lord, the aforementioned Bobby Z. The ACLU is apparently trying to get the commish fired when a brick is hurled through Jim's window.
That was either a protester taking things too far, or those rowdy construction workers are playing dodge brick on their coffee break again.
A short time later, through what I can only assume was instant bat messaging, Jim tells Pointy Ears that an injunction forced him to recall his men from the hill, but doesn't think they were doing much good anyway. Batman tells him not to let Prescott influence his decision-making, and that guilt is wasted energy.
That's one of those lines that sounds pithy and insightful, but only in this specific context. There are plenty of people in the world that absolutely need to feel guilty for the things they do, and I'm sure naming them would get me a slew of trolls in the comments.
Also, looks like that brick sent some glass into Jim's forehead. He says he'd prefer it if Corley disappeared, but Bats reminds him that's not what he does.
Come on, he's not talking about killing him, just abduct him in the middle of the night, drop him in the middle of a country with no extradition treaty to the U.S., with a sign taped to him that says the nation's leader likes to French kiss goats, and let things go from there.
Pointy Ears concludes by apologizing that he's too busy to help, while he drops off a gift at a precinct, a man tied up with a note that reads, "My name is Bobby Z. I sell drugs. Arrest me."
Wouldn't it be hilarious if this counted in court as both an admission of guilt and turning himself in?
Corley finally has that chat with Trevor about his attempted Grand Theft Auto, likening it to a father chastising his son, though adding that the kid owes him and is on probation until further notice. He uses vague but formal language to describe their business in the growth market, largely undisturbed by police, and, most importantly, they aren't thieves and do not steal cars. He forces Trev to repeat this with conviction at the barrel of his gun. So fatherly. Then he has him take care of a trash bag with the remains of Bobby Z. Corley bailed him out, but stabbed him in the middle of his rant about being captured by the Batman. As Trevor drags the dead man away, he's told everything will be fine so long as he keeps his nose clean.
That sounds like a lie.
Meanwhile, at a meeting in the mayor's office, Gordon mentions the trouble with the hill, which most everyone considers old news and race baiting that's gone on too long. After a crack about getting Batman to help, meaning they don't believe he exists either, the commish needs everyone's help in leaning on Demetrius Corley, and eventually see him behind bars. The Madam Mayor agrees before they move on to another topic. Now, about trash collection in Robinson Park.
I think we should just let the garbage pile up in the streets, to rot away and stink up the whole city. After all, that truly speaks to what sanitation is.
I think there may be some misattribution of dialogue bowls here. The redhead next to Jim appears to be called Sheila, but it's actually Sarah Essen, his second wife. This unnamed dude starts talking, and his dialogue continues into the next panel that makes a joke about bats. Then the mayor, apparently the one in red, apologizes for Sheila's swing. So, am I mistaken and Sheila is actually the guy with a mustache and glasses? Also, weird time for Jim to be doodling a bat emblem, but moving on. Trevor is outside with some friends, writing on his laptop when a cop named Merritt stops by to talk to him. He warns that Corley is going down soon, and the kid shouldn't go down with him. He's only powerful within the hill, but 3 blocks east, he's nobody. Trevor figures that the hill is a prison set up by the white man for black folk, and he'd rather die at Corley's side than walk those 3 blocks. Jim Gordon stops by, and I'm not sure why this guy is showing off his gun like that in front of 2 cops. Kinda seems like he's asking for trouble. Commissioner, I wasn't informed you were coming, sir. Sleepwalking. Working on my demons.
Jilly acting up on you? You really should label your leftovers with a date before you put them in the fridge.
The commish doesn't need an escort, so Merritt takes his leave, as Jim takes a seat next to Trevor. The kid asks what he's expecting to change or who he's looking for by coming by every night, which he's apparently been doing, and Gordon isn't quite sure. Later, he's on the roof of the GCPD sharing coffee in front of the bat signal with Sarah Essen. Jim's had no luck finding dirt on Corley and isn't sure why Batman is being stubborn about this matter. Sarah thinks that maybe the Dark Knight knows that Jim wants him to solve this problem for him, and maybe he's trying to tell him something. Considering how often the guy just disappears on him, not being straightforward on the matter kinda tracks.
We're through the looking glass here, people.
Later, Jim is at a scene where, presumably, Batman snagged some mobsters and totaled their van, but no one saw anything. Later still, one of his officers is asking for help for overwhelmed housing cops, but Jim is determined to clean up the hill and suggests bringing in Merritt for ideas. For now, he's off to a charity dinner. Since he's no longer smoking, he gets a club soda where he encounters Bruce Wayne. They have a chat about his date, whose name he has to remember by checking his date book. What's really fun here is that there's another guy there that just disappears after one look from Bruce. Jim up and leaves when Alanis Prescott arrives, and then goes to visibly threaten Demetrius. The guy plays it cool, saying he's just another charitable donor, that white man's guilt is what's bothering the commish, then eyes a busboy. Questioning him, much like he did Gravedigger disguised Batman, a knife is discreetly thrown into the kid's arm. He is a busboy. My bad.
And much like before, we glaze over any aftermath to this and jump to another scene. Even if no one saw who threw the knife, I doubt it would go unnoticed that the kid Corley grabbed ended up with a stab wound. Word would spread, people would make assumptions.
At another meeting with the mayor, the same people are trying to control Jim's outburst, which has already made the papers. They don't want to endorse grabbing a private citizen for seemingly no reason, but sympathize with his frustrations and avoid suspending Jim. Chief Manny, who we saw a couple pages ago, approaches, whispering that there's no one on his team named Merritt. This makes Gordon recall the meeting last week, where someone mentioned a power surge at the Hall of Records. In the Batcave, Bruce is mentioning to Alfred how Trevor could have shot him that night, but didn't. Not out of fear, but lack of both care and belief. Right now, he wants to understand the pathology on the Corley case, which will require special, if improvisational, methods to close. By now, Gordon must have discovered that Merritt is a phony.
However, could you know that, sir?
I looked at the page just before this one. Real handy when I want to check out scenes I'm not actually in.
Jim will eventually find a stand-in Batcave, information that will likely be fed to Corley by cops on his payroll, and Bats' whole caper will be exposed, so he gets into his cop car and drives off.
So, how long has Batman been posing as this black cop, I presume wearing a prosthetic mask of some kind? It seemed like the kids he talked to knew him to a familiar capacity, so it had to be a few weeks at least. Does he really hate golf all that much when he doesn't need a haircut?
Batman enters an apartment building in the hill, passing two young men completely unfazed by him, figuring him as just a white dude in a cape. He approaches the door to an apartment where men with guns are counting their money and possibly making drugs. One of them answers the door. What you need? Justice.
That's a Marvel character. You got the wrong universe, man.
Oh, my mistake. Have a good night.
He busts in, declaring that he's the Batman and he's coming for Corley. Tell him I'm coming for him.
You tell him I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Believe it! Wait, are you Batman or Naruto? Anyway, after tossing the doorman out the window, that we can only hope gets caught by the fire escape, sheesh, Jim is talking with a records clerk about the power surge they experienced. It was apparently very brief. There are computers going offline for an eye blink, as well as the secondary security unit protecting the archives where they keep things nobody cares about, like old city plans, including those of the Hill, Jim realizes. An hour passes, Batman's still fighting Corley's goons. Wow, hope he upgraded his armor. While Gordon and the clerk have been poring over the blueprints, until he finds a pump room that was replaced 20 years back, which is where he tells the clerk to tell his office he's heading, because it's just big enough. Big enough for what, sir?
Why, a Cinnabon, of course. I think a pastry shop is exactly what the hill needs right now.
Good news, that doorman did catch the fire escape, and Batman snags him as he leaps over the exploding apartment. And while others are freaking out about a psycho in the building, Trevor is just outside chilling with his laptop working on his screenplay. On the one hand, good for him for committing to his writing. On the other hand, nearby explosion! At least briskly walk further from the flames, man. But he can ride away instead, as Demetrius drives up with some of his men. I guess the boss man didn't see Bats carry one of his gunmen just now. They take him to a location that a snitch in Gordon's office told him about, knocking down the door where they find a Bat costume, Merritt's police car and uniform, and various gathered information on Corley's operation to shut it down. Still believing this to be the Commissioner's hoax, and certainly hurting from the Bat's attack earlier, he's confident he'll be back up to speed in a couple of days, and notices a timetable which he plans to use against pointy ears. That's when Gordon walks in with a couple officers, marveling at the layout, which Corley thinks is an act. But Jim more or less brushes him off, and calls his wife to tell her he'll be home soon. Later, Demetrius is meditating somewhere, and talking about his ancestors' fear of evil spirits eating souls, and the origin of the word cynic.
The cynics were a group of philosophers who went around complaining all the time.
Hey, I'm not a struggling YouTuber with a show no one watches. I'm a philosopher. Does that mean I should get paid more? Or, at all?
Quick question, who is he talking to? He's never been shown to talk to himself before, but anyway, he hears something and heads outside to find the gravedigger, whom he figures is Batman, and just made a big hole in an alley. I guess the ground wasn't concrete there.
Midnight. Right on time.
Except that his watch just now isn't showing midnight, more like 10. Does he have it set to a different time zone or something? Corley notes how his goons and surveillance have all been disabled, but isn't worried. Despite his labs being destroyed, he'll be back at it in an hour and has found Bats' base and knows about the scam operation. Bats laments that he's beaten, that try as he might, he couldn't make Demetrius believe. So he'll have to make him disappear. The Kingpin isn't buying this and demands the shovel, but Batman jabs him with the handle.
You're not paying attention. You're crazy! I'll sue! This is police brutality! I'm not the police. I'm Batman.
I'm Batman.
Fed up, Corley pulls his gun and fires, apparently sending the digger into the grave he just made. He feels pretty good about this, until he's hit from behind, because Batman is basically magic when it's dark out.
Kabong!
The jump-suited Crusader starts throwing dirt on the gang boss, who demands to speak to Gordon, but he's still not paying attention. Turns out, he's in the same grave as his competitor Bobby Z, who has a new note attached with the addendum as to who killed him. Continuing to shovel dirt back into the hole, Batman's dialogue gets more grisly, saying he used to lack faith like Corley, until he found something worthy to live for.
And I love my job.
Being a dog walker is a lot more rewarding than people might think.
Contrary to his adversary's pleas, the Dark Knight says he can do this anytime he wants, telling the drug dealer to remember that, and remember him, as he pulls him out from the grave. He reiterates his name one last time, as a tear slides down the once tough crook's face, and it is glorious.
Wow, there is a God.
A short time later, police have arrived, Corley is handcuffed, and Trevor is on a nearby rooftop, with his gun trained on the scene, a weapon he took from Merritt, so presume that he got it from the fake Bat base. Batman, now in his usual work clothes, tells the young man to make up his mind, like he did the night he chose not to shoot Pointy Ears. Corley won't be a concern for him anymore, so long as Trevor believes in himself, as the aspiring writer hands over the firearm.
A lesson you can only get from Batman, or Shrek, or How to Train Your Dragon, or Kung Fu Panda, or...
Later, at the signal, Bats is telling Gordon he needn't apologize for any doubt he had, as the whole point was to keep Jim in the dark. If he'd known, the slightest facial tick or tell could have tipped off Demetrius. Though he was so well protected and covered so many bases, Batman admits he got lucky, and later in the Batcave tells Alfred that the drug lord could come back stronger, and that as humiliating as it is to admit, Batman has limits and his abilities don't mean a thing if his target doesn't believe he's out there. The butler is assured he'll think of something, as always, and the comic ends on Bruce saying that next time he faces someone like Demetrius Corley, it could mean the end of the myth he's worked so hard to cultivate.
That was Batman the Hill, and I thought it was pretty good.
Though the title character isn't shown as prominently as with other stories, it kind of works into the overall challenge for him. How do you use your whole Bat motif to scare criminals in an area of the city that's forgotten and ignored, where no one is believing in the idea? At least other Gotham residents were aware of the name Batman, and word spread so that enough people believed. Though, given how long Bruce has been doing this and how often he patrols, it is a little weird that any part of Gotham would be so in denial of him that they barely think twice when he walks right past. Though, again, it's an area that's written off by the people in power, so maybe it shouldn't be too surprising.
And yes, there is a bit of a racial component to the story, as I mentioned earlier, one that certain loudmouths wouldn't hesitate to twist out of context on their loser network shows, or others to complain about politics being shoved down their throats. But if they would look closer, they would realize how wrong they are.
Impoverished areas like this do exist, and history has shown that it wasn't exactly racial equality that made things as they are. But the story really isn't about that, nor is it about blaming all white people or insisting on specific answers to the problem. If anything, Batman telling Hollywood to believe in himself could be construed as pick yourself up by your own bootstraps.
Which would be helpful if more real-world people with power and authority were like Bruce Wayne instead of less subtle Lex Luthors that work for their own gain and gleefully cut those bootstraps. Or people's feet.
It's really more about Batman and Gordon trying to catch this one very elusive crook, making a bad situation worse for his own profit. Bats is operating even more in the shadows and keeping Jim in the dark for optimum results. Wait, I think I just mixed my metaphors there. While the commish is trying to improve things on the Hill, it's not really working, whether it was trying to find evidence of Corley's operations or keeping the peace with an armed presence, which is quickly called off.
Really, the story is about two crime fighters, one within the law, one outside it, who've survived insane, bizarre encounters with psycho-jesters and mud mutants that find themselves in a very difficult, down-to-earth situation.
There seem to be times where pacing jumped ahead without warning, little indication of how much time was passing between scenes, and some incidents that get glossed over, with barely any chance to feel like they impact the story, like the aforementioned police occupation. While I've found that irritating in other comics, this is one instance where I think it's done much better, and perhaps intentionally. For the sake of the overall story, we got as much info on that decision and a few others as we needed. Jim tried a strong police presence, it didn't work, it caused protests and a legal headache, so he pulled back. Similarly, close observation tells you more about Trevor, aka Hollywood. He's an aspiring writer despite his pessimistic outlook at probably never leaving the Hill, and is a big movie fan. I might have liked a few more details about how Demetrius protected himself, because while he was undoubtedly charismatic and a decent hyper-observant foil for our protagonists, it felt difficult to believe he could get away with having knives thrown at people. And after seeing him so calm, confident, and coldly abusive to others, it was so satisfying to see pointy ears put the fear of God into him at the end. I thought the art was fine, though character outlines were more angular compared to other styles I've seen. Some darkly lit scenes were colored in a way to make things difficult to differentiate, details getting lost. Also, for someone allegedly in his late teens, Trevor often looked like someone nearing his 30s.
And now, for those headlines I skipped earlier. Damned. Mom, the comic just swore! We are not thieves. We prefer to be referred to as freelance spontaneous possession or reallocation agents. Can't we all just get along? Well, I can, but he can't. 3 blocks east. If you pass the McDonald's, the one with the missing arches from the Condiment King heist, you've gone too far. Waiting.
The waiting game's done. Let's play Hungry Hungry Hippos.
My bad. If I'd known that's where your spleen was, I would not have swung my bat like that. The number you have reached is now a Walmart. Nobody can write a third act. I know that's you, James Tinian IV. Plenty of people can, even if you can't. Maybe work on your failings instead of generalizing the writing community. Remember me. Don't you make me think of that song from Pixar's Coco. I'm not crying, you are.
A few things I thought were kind of odd. Like, again, Batman didn't seem to tend to Hollywood's injuries, though I imagine he was too injured himself to do much good. Then you have some of his statements that felt overgeneralizing. Guilt is wasted energy, and the end result of catching Corley making the methods irrelevant are crazy specific to this context, and outside of it doesn't shine the best light.
All in all, this is a decent one-shot with a good story, a good villain, and Bruce Wayne at his Bruce Wayniest. Even if it has a detail or two that raises my eyebrow. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.